So we are going to start a new series on history of English literature from today onwards, and we'll study it in two parts. And it is very important for any student of English literature who has designs or who has dreams to pursue higher studies in English literature, or those who want to crack various competitive examinations like the qualifying examinations like SET, State Eligibility Test, or the NTA, National Eligibility Test. And moreover, even if you're not in that streak, still as a student of English literature, you should have a sound knowledge of the entire history of English literature. And it is very important for you to understand the various periods into which this entire literature is divided, right? So I'll be taking up in two parts. In part one, I'll be covering history of English literature right from the Old English literature till the 18th century, which is actually part of your MA first semester course. Though in this particular video, I'll just be touching upon various periods in the English literary history, so that you get a chronological record of the entire events that happened during this particular period. Though we will be taking up each period separately, because it is not possible to cover the entire 500 or 600 years of literature in one video. So but this is very important, and you must take it a little seriously. Okay, so now we begin with the periods of British literature. For the sake of convenience, these periods are divided along important or famous kings, or also along the names of great literary men, right? So we divide the English literature into the following periods. First is we consider all the literature written during 450 AD to 1066, known as the Old English, or we also call it Anglo-Saxon period, right? So from 450 AD to 1066. And why 1066? Because 1066, England was attacked, or the French rulers, they came here, and we'll be discussing that shortly. Okay, and then from 1066 to 1500, 1500, it is considered to be the Middle English period, also known by the great poet or the father of English language and literature, also known by the name of the age of Chaucer. Okay, so next division is from 1500 to 1660, known as the Renaissance. Renaissance, it's a very fertile period for the growth of English literature, and it is further followed by the Elizabethan age from 1558 to 1603, also known as the age of Shakespeare, the great dramatist. Then this period of Elizabethan age is followed by the Jacobean age from 1603 to 1625, and then from 1625 to 1649 it is known as Caroline age, and then from 1649 to 1660 it is known as the Commonwealth period. So if you see, the Renaissance is actually divided into these four periods. From 1500 to 1660, we consider the entire period as the Renaissance, and it is further subdivided into Elizabethan age, Jacobean age, Caroline age, and finally the Commonwealth period, or also known as the Puritan interregnum, right? this was a brief period of around 10 years, 11 years, during which Oliver Cromwell he established, the government of the Commonwealth, the rule of the Commonwealth, known as Puritan Age. And next is the period from 1660 to 1785, known as the Neoclassical period. This period is also divided into these three sub periods. First is 1660 to 1700, the Restoration Age, also known as the Age of Dryden. 1700 to 1745, the Augustan Age, known as the Age of Pope, and from 1745 to 1785, the Age of Sensibility. So you can see here, just to show you, I'll just take a pointer, that how these ages, they have been divided into different periods. And you can see here the Elizabethan age, the Renaissance, this is from 15 to 1660. So it further is divided into these four sub periods, right? So all these fall under the age of this impact of Renaissance, right? Similarly here also the Neoclassical period, this entire Neoclassical period is from 1660 to 1785. That means it covers briefly these three sub periods: the Restoration Age, the Augustan Age, and the Age of Sensibility. So this is to be covered in your MA first semester course, and each student of English literature should know about this division. Then I will be going through part 2, which we will not be covering in this video, but in the second one that will come soon after. So this entire period is further subdivided into the following periods: 1785 to 1830, the Great Romantic period in English literature. From 1832 to 1901, the Victorian period is further subdivided into these two sub periods: the Pre-Raphaelites and Aestheticism and Decadence. Okay, so this is the Victorian period, further subdivided into these two. And then comes from 1901 to 1914, the Edwardian period, or you call it the pre-war period also. Then from 1910 to 1936, this is known as the Georgian period. And from 1936 onwards, or we'll call it 1945 onwards, it is known as the postmodern period. However, from 1914 onwards, we call it the modern period. Okay, so I shouldn't get confused here. Actually, modern period, this begins here in Edwardian period itself, from 1914 onwards. We also divide it as pre-war period, that is before 1914, and then the interwar period, that is from 1914 to 1945, and also we call the post-war period the post-modern period, that is after 1945. So this is what we are going to cover in the second video, and for the time being, let us discuss the Old English period. So the Old English period, or also known as the Anglo-Saxon period, it refers to the literature produced after the invasion of Celtic England by three Germanic tribes: Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. So the original inhabitants, जो वहाँ के original जो बाशिंदे थे, रहने वाले, वो थे Celtic people, जो सबसे पहले वहाँ पे रहते थे इंग्लैंड में. तो वो क्या हुआ, उनके ऊपर इन्वेशन, उनका आक्रमण किया कैल्ट्स के ऊपर. थ्री जर्मैनिक ट्राइब्स जिनके नाम थे Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. So they came in the first half of the 5th century, or they settled there, and they pushed these Celtic original inhabitants to the boundaries or to the border. So, and slowly, England became England. So, this is how the name came from the Angles, right? So, this Old English period, it continues up to 1066, and this was the time in 1066 when Duke of Normandy, also known as William the Conqueror, he was William Orange was his name. So he was titled, he was given the title of William the Conqueror, right? So 1066, this was the first time the French rule came into England with William Orange. And during this period, written literature, began to develop from oral traditions, and in the 8th century, poetry written in vernacular Anglo-Saxon, that is Old English, that appeared, right? Then, if you talk about, the literature, English work of literature, so the oldest, most well-known, oldest work of English literature is Beowulf, okay, which is great Germanic. It is kind of epic poem. Epic, what is an epic? That I have described in another video. Okay, you can go through that. It is very important for you to learn the basic forms, the literary forms of poetry, drama, as well as novel. So for that I have created a video series. You can watch each one of them, because for you it is very important to understand the basic forms or basic literary forms. So Beowulf, it is a Germanic epic poem, and the two poets of the Old English period who wrote on biblical and religious themes were Hedima and Saint. Okay, so you must read about them also, because in competitive exams questions are asked from Old English literature also. You must read a little about Beowulf too, right? But as I told you, it is beyond the scope of this video to cover all these things here, but I'll be covering in subsequent videos one by one, right? So these were the Celts, who was actually the original inhabitants of England, the earliest inhabitants, right? So then came these Angles, the Saxons and the Jutes, and they invaded, they attacked, and they pushed these people to the borders, and they themselves settled in and around England, okay, and because they were more powerful, or now you cannot visualize the world as it was during those ages, because there were no national boundaries as such. These tribes, they traveled from one place to another in search of food and safe places, and might is right, वो जिसकी लाठी उसकी भैंस। तो जिसकी जलती थी वो जहाँ दूसरों को भगा देता था और खुद वहाँ जम जाता था। तो these were the historic times when the nations were not that strong. There was no national identity or boundary of England. So that is why these tribes, they came and settled there, and slowly they became the original, became the original inhabitants of that place, right? So Angles, Saxons and Jutes. So you must go through these texts. Little you must know about Beowulf and these two poets also. So this is the man who invaded England in 1066, known as Norman Conquest, right? So then we begin the Middle English period, which begins exactly after 1066 till 1500. So Middle English period literature produced in these like nearly 4.5 centuries between the Norman conquest of 1066 and 1500. So then, at that time, England did not have a unified kind of linguistic identity. There are different dialects were spoken in different parts of England, in Northumbrian, South, another dialect. Then East and West Midland dialects were spoken. So England did not have a standard literary language. But when Geoffrey Chaucer he came, he not only set the East Midland dialect as the standard language of England, but also made it popular through his writings, Geoffrey Chaucer's writings, and the most famous of which is the Canterbury Tales. And also there are other writers, the anonymous Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and also Thomas Malory's Morte Arthur. So we'll be discussing about this is how this is why Geoffrey Chaucer has been regarded as, or he has been described as the father of English language and literature, because it was he who not only set English as a standard language but also popularized it and took the English literature to the position or place where it deserved to be. So we'll be discussing in detail when we discuss this particular age, right? So then these are the major works of the age. Sir Thomas Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur. So there was influence of Latin, French, and then came Geoffrey Chaucer. And though he also wrote in both these languages, the French and the Latin, yet the most original and most significant contribution of Chaucer was, that is why this great man is regarded as the father of English language, right? So this Canterbury Tales, which is a wonderful narrative and defined a medley crowd, a crowd which consists of people from all the stratas of the society. There are women, there are working class people, the elite, the noble class, nobility, as well as people from the church. So we'll be discussing in details about the Canterbury Tales, and then I'll take you to the English literary renaissance. Renaissance means rebirth, revival, or reawakening, right? So as I told you in the previous video also, so this English literary renaissance, it consists of 4 ages: the Elizabethan age, the Jacobean age, the Caroline age, and the Commonwealth period, which is also known as the Puritan age. Okay, so the first is the Elizabethan age. As the name itself suggests, this was the reign or rule of Queen Elizabeth, which started in 1558 and ended in 1603. And this, she was a great queen who had maintained a great balance, both religious as well as political. England was growing, it was, reaching new destinations. The English nation was in a great nationalistic spirit, and this was the most fertile period for literature to thrive, and that's how it became a very important age in English literature. So the Elizabethan period is generally regarded as the greatest in the history of English literature. It was marked by a strong nationalistic spirit of patriotism, religious tolerance, social content, intellectual progress, and unbounded enthusiasm. So one can understand that in such a vigorous state of thought, feeling, and action, so the best expression was found in drama, and that is why, and that is how there was a wonderful development of the drama during this period. You see the university wits, John Lilly, George Bailey, Robert Greene, Thomas Nash, Christopher Marlowe, then and the greatest of all, William Shakespeare. So all these dramatists, they, you know, existed during this particular age. And one more feature, this not only was an age of great drama, it was an age of great lyrical poetry also. Sonnet writing became very popular during this age. Philip Sidney, Edmund Spenser, and then William Shakespeare himself, he was a great sonneteer. And what are sonnets? I have made another video, as I told you. For someone who is trying to pursue a career in English language or literature, he should have a very clear idea about various literary forms, and for that I have made a series of videos, which a playlist I have created, which you can watch, and you must watch and have a clear idea of different genres, right? So then the important writers of this age, then as I have already told you, the university wits also, and then William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, Edmund Spenser, Sir Walter Raleigh, and Ben Jonson, right? So these are the people, great people. On to your left is William Shakespeare, and then John Lilly. Okay, then the Jacobean age. So the Jacobean age of English literature, it coincides with the reign or rule of James I. James I का जब rule था 1603 to 1625. During this time, the literature became sophisticated, somber, serious, and conscious of social abuse and rivalry. So this Jacobean age produced rich prose and drama, and there were great translations also which were made by the king himself. So King James translation of the Bible, and Shakespeare and Jonson, Ben Jonson, we'll be talking about him later in the next video, how he wrote the comedy of humor. And this Shakespeare was also writing during this particular age, because Shakespeare died actually in 1616. Okay, so Shakespeare and Jonson wrote during the Jacobean age, as well as you find that John Donne, who is associated with the metaphysical poetry. Metaphysical poetry, it is there in your this poetry course. You have some poems which are in your course, which are written by John Donne. So metaphysical poetry, we'll be talking about very important topic for competitive exams. Then there were some great essayists like Francis Bacon and other writers like Thomas Middleton, right? So this is the Jacobean age, right? So John Donne and Francis Bacon. And then came the Caroling age, and this age, exactly coincides with the rule of Charles I, 1625 to 1649. And there was a formalism, or you can say these people, the writers, they paid more attention to the form. So there was a fine or refinement and elegance in their work, right? And Charles I, he came in conflict with the parliament, and this conflict, rose to such heights that ultimately it resulted in the execution or beheading of the King Charles I by his own parliamentarians, and in 1649, so he was executed. And in this era, there was some poets who were generally courtiers who wrote for the court, the Cavalier poets. And the great spirit of Elizabethan drama was coming to an end, okay, because vulgarity and melodramatic scenes, these came into the stage, and there was a degradation and drama which was at the zenith, or it was at the topmost or the highest level of its popularity during the British age, now had deteriorated and had become, so immoral that ultimately all the theaters in England had to be closed by a royal order, right? So this is, how the things turned out ultimately. Uh, then comes the Commonwealth period. So after the execution of Charles I in 1649, so government was established under the leadership of Oliver Cromwell, who led the Commonwealth, the rule of the people, right? But this lasted only for 10 years or 11 years, 1649 to 1660, when after the death of Cromwell, uh, again Charles II returned to the throne. Okay, so this period, this Commonwealth period, though it was not a very long period, however, it was a period of great Puritan restraints, Puritan restrictions. The Puritans, they wanted to, purge or clean the society or the English social life from all those maladies, all those diseases which had crept into the social and public life. There was widespread corruption, so they've banned everything. Even the simple pleasures of life were banned, and this period produced the great political writings of John Milton, John Milton's Areopagitica, and Thomas Hobbes, that political treatise, Leviathan. Okay, and also great prose written by Andrew Marvell. So, uh, as I was telling you, that the Puritans closed theaters in 1642 on moral and religious grounds. So you can understand that how drama, which reached the pinnacle of success, or which reached its highest point of popularity during the Elizabethan age, how abruptly it ended in such a bad state, right? That all the theaters had to be closed in by a royal order. So then this is John Milton's Areopagitica, which is actually about the liberty of press. Okay, so Charles I, he had came in conflict with the parliament or with the people because of his repressive or oppressive, ruling policies, and this conflict increased to such a level that resulted in the execution of King Charles I. And on to your right, you can see Thomas Hobbes, his political treatise Leviathan. Okay, so then comes the neoclassical period. So neoclassical period, which is generally counted from 1660 to 1785, it was greatly influenced by French literature. So because Charles II was restored to the throne, and he was in hiding in France. So he not only brought French manners with him, he brought the French way of life with him. And all the writers of this age, they imitated the French classics. However, the worst thing was they could not imitate the depth and the larger scope of French literature. Rather, they imitated the vices of French literature, which resulted in a kind of superficial kind of literature, especially the comedy of manners. Okay, so this literary period of the literature of this period is, it uses more philosophy and reason. So it is more logical and based on reason. So here intellect is more important rather than emotion, and there is extensive use of wit, and there is more emphasis on style, that is refinement. So neoclassical period it is the first great age of English literary criticism also. Okay, so then this is the neoclassical age, in which John Milton continues to write his Paradise Lost was Paradise Regained also was written. Then this brought Comedy of Manners. Then the Restoration age, as I told you, this is the first one. Restoration means restoration of King Charles II to the throne. So the neoclassical period, as I told you, can be divided into three distinct ages, sub-periods. First is the Restoration age, then the Augustan age, and the Age of Sensibility. So the Restoration age comes first. So from 1660 to 1700, generally we mark this age as the Restoration age, because, as I told you, Charles II, that is again the monarchy, was restored, and the Restoration poetry, it was because these are the features of neoclassical poetry, so they continue to be here too. So it is full of logic, reason, wit, and satire. Satire, another literary form, which I have covered in those videos where you can go through it. And so wit is nothing but a smart word play and sharp humor. और जैसे आप वो कपिल शर्मा वाला शो देखते हैं, तो Kapil Sharma, his presence of mind, and he uses words, that word play, how he uses those words very smartly to create a sharp humor, a shocking humor. So वो सबसे best example आप wit का समझ सकते हैं. Okay, so then so a lot of prose and poetry, and the comedy of manners, जिसको restoration comedy भी कहा जाता है, वो इस age में बहुत ही, it was written extensively. Okay, and also John Milton's Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained were also written during this particular period. And this was a great age of criticism, because John Dryden, he had written a wonderful piece of criticism, right, which you will be studying in your this another paper, another course. So this is John Dryden and the use of wit and satire. John Dryden was written Absalom and Achitophel. Okay, so which we'll be covering, in little elaborate manner separately, because as I told you, each age has some features, has great writers, has greater works. So this is just to initiate you into the history of English literature, so that you have a framework, a chronological idea of what happened and when it happened. Then we come to the Augustan age. So English Augustan age, King Augustus, the Emperor Augustus, Roman Emperor Augustus, he was a great emperor, right, of Rome, who existed from 27 BC to 14th AD. So he lived many years ago. But why this name is applied to this age? So the reason is that the rule or the literary period of Virgil and Ovid, it was under the Roman Emperor Augustus. So this brilliant literary period, brilliant classical literary period of Rome, it draws a parallel with this age, because the Augustan writers, they were influenced by the great classical writers of that particular age. And in English literature, this Augustan age refers to the literature with all those characteristics which these great classical writers had, Virgil and Ovid, which were of refinement, clarity, elegance, and balance of judgment. Okay, so obviously, as I told you, this falls under the neoclassical age. So satire is, continues to be the main theme of this age also. So the well-known writers of the Augustan age are Jonathan Swift, Alexander Pope, and Daniel Defoe. Okay, And also the first English novel, the proper English novel was also written during this particular age. And the novel of characters, uh, Pamela by Samuel Richardson, 1740. So great contribution in English literature. And these are the great men, Alexander Pope and Daniel Defoe. Then the last one in this neoclassical age is the age of sensibility, which is also known as the age of Johnson. This is Johnson. There is an H here. Johnson. This is you must not confuse it with Ben Jonson. Ben Jonson, there is no H, right? But here this is Samuel Johnson. Samuel, Samuel, Samuel Johnson. So, Ben Jonson, he was writing towards the end of the Elizabethan age. Then uh, after that also Jacobean age, in Jacobean age also he wrote. But we are talking about Samuel Johnson. Okay, Johnson, right? So these are two different names. You should not confuse. Ben Jonson is associated with comedy of humors, and he has been a great writer during that particular age. But Samuel Johnson is different. Okay, so this is also known as the age of sensibility. The literature reflected the worldview of enlightenment and began to emphasize instinct and feeling rather than judgment and restraint. So, this was a U-turn from the previous spirit, right? Or the spirit during the previous periods, right? So here now again they started emphasizing feeling and instinct rather than logic, reason, or judgment and restraint. So there was a growing sympathy for Middle Ages during this age of sensibility, and because of which there was a great interest in medieval ballads and folk literature. So another name for this period is the age of Johnson, right? Johnson, John, not Jon, Johnson, because he is one of the greatest authors of this period, Samuel Johnson, and he was a great intellectual too, right? So this period also produced some of the greatest early novels of the English language, which include Richardson's Clarissa and Henry Fielding's Tom Jones. Okay, so these are the great men, Samuel Richardson and Henry Fielding. So with this, we finish this first part. This is just to initiate you into the history of English literature, though I do not claim it to be the complete history of English literature. However, as I told you, this is just the initiation, right? And we have to build on this now, because each age, as I told you, has voluminous or a large number of writers and voluminous productions or creations in different literary forms. So we'll be covering each period distinctly and separately in the coming videos, so that you get a clear idea of each period, so that you can attempt, or you have a better understanding of